So I hear a lot of talk about both online and from clients coming to us about different types of funds, setting up an investment fund for real estate, private equity, whatever type of deal it is. They're doing venture capital. So people talk about, okay, well, what's a blind pool fund? And what are these other types of funds? So in the news, there's a lot of talk about a deal by deal fund, series fund, class fund, customized fund. Those are all kind of the same words for something other than a blind pool fund, which a blind pool fund is basically pooling everyone's capital together and investing it as one giant pool of capital versus deal by deal fund where you kind of separate them out. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of examples of how that works or what it looks like so you can kind of get an understanding of the difference. This is kind of based on a prior deal that I did, fund versus syndication in real estate, where a syndication is an individual deal where you raise capital and a fund is completely different. So let me share my screen, but it's a little bit different. Let's see here. There we go. All right. Blind pool fund versus a series fund. So fund versus a syndication. This is a prior, let me skip forward. So this is what a typical commercial real estate syndication looks like. You've got at the top, you've got the property or the asset being acquired. The next box below, called the issuer, is the investment entity that basically raises the capital and buys the asset. Below that, you've got the different owners, the investors, and the manager or general partner that basically gets profits from that. A fund in real estate is where you basically pool your capital to invest in multiple deals or multiple assets, led by a sponsor who finds the deals. And that's kind of the name that you'll see in my slides because that's the person like the GP or manager that puts the deal together. Let me get to, okay, so here's a typical real estate fund. And in the middle, you've got the fund, which is a limited partnership or an LLC, typically. That's where the capital is pooled, and that's the entity that does the investing. That's the main fund, if you will, the investment fund. Now, above that, you'll see in purple, you've got different properties. Let's say in this example, there's three different properties, three different addresses. A lot of times they'll be set aside in special purpose entity or special purpose vehicle underneath the fund, which is usually 100% owned LLC. So in here it says SPE1, that's property one owner. That is an LLC that would own property one, take title to property one, but that LLC is owned 100% by the fund. So the fund completely owns and controls that LLC. It's basically just set up that way to segregate it out for liability purposes, potentially because of lender issues or things like that, borrowing on that address. And then underneath, just like the syndication, you've got investors and a GP that's sharing in the capital or distributions when you eventually get paid. Now, a blind pool fund, this is where, commonly you put in all your capital into that LP or LLC. So investors come in, they pool all their capital. In this example, this is actually after distributions, but let's say they put their capital together and they go out and this fund acquires three properties, puts them into separate LLCs just for liability purposes. And the fund owns property one, property two, and property three through these LLCs that the fund owns and controls. Now, let's say there's either a sale or cash coming in from those properties. In the example, you've got 50,000 coming in from property one. Let's say it's whatever it is, a month or quarter worth of rent from an apartment complex. You got 50 grand to distribute and it comes into the fund. So that LLC brings the capital into the fund. Property two, same thing. It's 40,000, comes into the fund. Property three, it's 10,000. That all goes mixed together in a $100,000 pool. Then next, after you have that $100,000 pool, a blind pool fund distributes it out. So let's say in this example, it's an 80-20 profit split, meaning that 80% of profits go to your investors, 20% goes to the sponsor or GP. So here you've got 20,000 going to the GP side, usually through an LLC that they own, and then 80,000 going pro rata to all of the investors in the fund, whether there's 20 or 100 investors. You split it up pro rata based on their ownership percentage of that $80,000. Now, what is a deal by deal fund? So, in a deal by deal fund, this is just one way of setting it up. The fund itself, instead of issuing, like in the prior example, the limited partners down here probably got limited partnership interests or maybe units. So you sign a subscription, you get limited partner units or interests, and you own a certain percentage of the fund in general, the whole LP or LLC. In this example, the investors pick and choose. So let's say in this example, Class A1 is a certain deal and it's tied to Property 1. So it's a separate class or series underneath the fund. And so it's almost like breaking up the fund into pieces and saying, okay, well, we have this fund that operates and invests in assets, but then you've got Class A1 or Series A1 that is tied just to Property 1. So my money as an investor goes into the fund and only over to Property 1 LLC to invest and to be used only for Property 1. Then when Property 1 makes money, it goes through the fund and gets split up and paid out just to me as an investor in Class A1. Any of the investors in Class A2, Class A3, they don't benefit from anything in Property 1. So in this example, you've got a 50,000 distribution, like in the prior example. Property 1 made a 50 grand. It's distributing it through the fund. Then the fund turns around and pays out the 80-20 split, just like the one before, the example. So 80,000 of that, or 80% of that 50,000, 40,000 goes to Class A1 owners, pro rata, based on their ownership percentage. And same thing, 20% split to the sponsor. So 10,000 goes over to the manager entity. Now, the Class A1 investors only get the allocation and benefit from that specific property. If there's a distribution from Property 2, they don't get the benefit of that. The manager or sponsor does, they get their split. So what are some of the differences? So some of the risks or benefits would be the fund, a blind pool fund, is diversified. In my example, there's 3 properties, 3 assets. So if one doesn't make money and the other 2 do, you've pooled them all together and you get the benefit of diversification in your investment. And that's typically what most funds are set up for, is to diversify across multiple assets to get the benefit of kind of evening things out, just like when you diversify a portfolio of investments. A deal by deal fund, you're only investing in typically or some kind of allocation towards certain assets. So it's more like investing in a syndication or a separate deal. You're only getting the benefit of that specific deal. You don't get the benefit of the other deals, but you also don't take the risk of loss of those other deals. And in some cases, when funds are set up, they're set up so that you can either auto allocate or potentially allocate to specific deals, like you pick and choose. I like this one, I don't like that one. So I'm only going to invest in Class A1 and Class A3, not A2, because I don't like the looks of that deal. So a lot of times in a customized fund, you can pick and choose which ones you want to invest in. In terms of speed, the fund setup is of the actual fund is pretty similar in terms of time to get it set up. With a fund, you've already got a blind pool of capital. You can be pretty quick to execute on a new deal that you find. Maybe you have to make a capital call from investors who made a commitment for another 200 grand or something to go after that. Because in a blind pool fund, you usually take capital commitments and they only call or fund part of their commitment as deals come in, versus a deal by deal fund. A lot of times you'll call their capital right up front because you already know what those specific deals are. But in a deal by deal fund, as you locate a project, you still need additional disclosures to your LPs, your investors. So typically we recommend putting together separate supplement, appendix, whatever you want to call it, to your PPM that explains this specific deal, any different risks associated with investing in, let's say, Class A1 for property one. Maybe there's certain specific issues with that property, risks, factors, different split. Maybe it's not 80-20, maybe it's 70-30 on that deal. Those are the kind of things that you disclose to your investors. So usually there's a small set of documents that need to be prepared. So that can slow things down a little on a deal by deal fund versus just calling capital or having the capital available. In a blind pool fund, the investors have really no control over where it gets invested. Usually the fund will say, here's our investment criteria. The fund manager is going to make decisions based on, okay, here's the certain criteria. If it fits within there, it's our discretion. We invest it wherever we want. Deal by deal, obviously, you can pick and choose as an investor. Yes, I like A1, I like A3, I don't like A2, however you want to allocate the money going into the fund. Now, in terms of costs, a blind pool fund can be a little bit cheaper to set up because you don't have to do individual deal disclosures as different classes come in or different projects come in. And the reason for that is a blind pool fund, you're telling your investors up front, you have no control over essentially where we invest. We're going to pick and choose where to invest your money. We don't have to tell you. The deal by deal is almost like raising money individually for each deal, saying, okay, here's deal A2, property two, here's the specifics of it. Do you want to put some money into this one? So setting up the blind pool fund is a one-time deal, not as much to worry about in terms of individual deal disclosures. So in a deal by deal fund, you have a little bit of added costs on legal in terms of disclosing all of that information to your investors. So that's a little bit about the specifics of deal by deal versus a blind pool fund. And so if you want a little bit more information, feel free to reach out, and thanks for watching.